Frank McCourt, if we are going to bend the arc of the internet in humanity's favor, as our CEO, Jeremy Lair, just described, and as I think the planet needs, we're going to need builders. And so, Frank McCourt, you come from a long line of builders in development and real estate, in sports. You're a civic entrepreneur, very, very deeply steeped in public policy on both sides of the Atlantic. And that was one of the themes that I wanted to pick up with you. But at the same time, I wanted to try to set the stage in this conversation around where has our traditional analog infrastructure fallen short? Because a lot of your motivation for spending time, energy, and money in this domain is because you have a pretty keen eye on where we're falling short. So for the audience's benefit, if I can get you to start thinking about and outlining the pieces of the puzzle where we've hit diminishing returns, whether it's banking, society. I know you spend a ton of time thinking about the corrections from the sins of big tech, particularly social media companies. So I'll tee that up as a starting point, and then I promise we'll have a free-form conversation that people won't regret.
Is that one question?
That's the opening gambit. We need to solve all that before we leave the stage.
Okay, so let's give it a whirl. So, hi everyone. Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, Dante, I'm a product of a family of builders. So I'm fifth generation. My great grandfather began the company in the 1893 rather, and started building roads when Henry Ford started building cars. And we've been building infrastructure ever since. And I mention that because I want to pick up on what Jeremy said about infrastructure. This is so key to, I think, tackling the set of issues, because the infrastructure that we currently have is fundamentally flawed in our belief. So, and the reason I say that is I think we're going to look back at what evolved over the last 30 years and say, how is it possible that anybody designing something that had the potential to be as big as this, and let's focus on the internet, the web for a moment, would design that without obviously designing for safety first, right? In construction, we always think about safety first. We don't go out and, build an airport or a bridge or a tunnel and then call the engineers to say, would you design in safety now? You go through great measures to make sure that the inherent design is fundamentally safe, at least to the extent that we can imagine risk. And then, how is it possible? We connected a device which can conceivably connect everybody on Earth, but there's no digital identity. There's no way to verify facts. There's no way to verify attributes, provenance, et cetera. So what was developed and unleashed with a move fast and break things kind of mentality emerged into something that is very different than the architects relying on the goodness of people and their inherent trust to use it correctly. And now we have something that is really, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it's out of control. And it's affecting all facets of our lives. It's, more than ironic that we're here today, at a moment when we have this banking crisis again. I agree completely with Jeremy that this is it's a deja vu type of moment. And, our journey here was really a deep concern over where the country was going, the U.S. and all democracies coming out of 08, 09, and seeing the unrest that created, the inequities that created, and the stress on democracy that created. I wanted to see our enterprise continue for another 5 generations, and was very concerned about that. So our first intervention was starting a public policy school in Washington, D.C., new school with Georgetown, and it's a new campus being built on Capitol Hill. It's an awesome school, but it can't move fast enough, to keep up with the problems that are being generated. And by the way, and I'll finish here, when we started that school, the same year Circle began, 2013, we created a massive data institute, which is part of the school. And the idea was to connect humanists, connect social scientists with this data and train them to be able to use the data for the common good. And what we learned in the course of 3 or 4 years was it was an impossible structure to work with, because the data that these scientists need, social scientists needed, was residing in places that they didn't have ready access to. So they were begging for the use of the data. And of course, the platforms acknowledged they had the data, but said, would you give me X, $1,000 for it? There was one example of a woman doing great research about human migration and being able to predict it based on words that were starting to be amplified on social media. Twitter had the data. She went to Twitter and said, can I have this for my research? Solving a big public problem. And they said, sure, for 80 grand. Her full budget was $200,000, right? So we shouldn't be going to third parties for data. Removing the intermediary, whether it's finance or social, is very important. At the end of the day, we need an intranet that's redesigned. It's an opt-in intranet. It's not a 24-hour-a-day vacuum cleaner, and where individuals have ownership and control of their data. Agency is, I believe, fundamental to democracy. And so I don't know how you say to people, we're going to protect your human rights, except scrape all of your digital information 24 hours a day.
Right. Well, look, and twice now with the 2008 crisis and the one that's unfolding before our eyes, we are privatizing gain and socializing losses, probably again to the tune of trillions of dollars. And people are not really participating in these outcomes, in no small measure, because, again, so many of the systems are opaque and we don't have agency. And so agency in all of our conversations is a key issue. How do we really get public policy leaders to understand the opportunity inherent in not only blockchain technology, but what the underlying technologies could represent vis-a-vis establishing sort of ownership, establishing agency, and establishing rights for economic value to accrue to individuals without sort of the costly intermediation that we have? Pick the system: politics, banking, society, content creation. At every stage, people are effectively dependent on technology as opposed to its agents.
I think we build it, and that's the best way to convince policymakers that it works, and that we need help to to do some downfill blocking and level the so-called playing field. We think of regulation. There's two types of regulation. One is to stop something. The other is to enable something. And I'll give you a simple example that I think is apropos. In 1993, we started a telecommunications company. At the time, there were 7 oligarchs, 7 baby bells in the United States that controlled all of the telecommunications. The 2.0 version of the internet was very nascent, but we saw the opportunity to actually provide to people their phone, their cable TV, and their high-speed internet access from one provider, and do it by putting in brand new, fiber optic cable in the big cities of America. We eventually raised $7 billion. We built this out in many cities. But the process for the company to be successful was not linear. In the first few years, what ended up happening is people were very excited. We were, by the way, the first to ever bundle, to do that concept. It was a marketing concept as well as a reality. And the oligarchs had copper wire in the ground. They had to build the infrastructure. We were building from scratch, so we had a leg up. It was interesting. People came to sign a contract with RCN, and they were about to sign and then would ask, or where do I put down my phone number? So I want my phone number. And we said, well, sorry, but we can't give you your phone number. We have to give you a new phone number because these incumbents say they own your phone number. And we were able to demonstrate to the U.S. Congress, along with others, that this was friction. This was just a way to prevent innovation to occur. And shouldn't people own their phone number? It was that at the time, think of it as their identity, right? They knew the number, their spouse knew the number, their kids, their grandparents, their friends. And eventually, in 1996, the Telecommunication Act was passed and phone numbers became portable. As soon as that happened, we were able to suddenly, our business grew very, very rapidly, as did many other businesses in the telecom space, which, by the way, is the ultimate infrastructure supporting all this. It's what's in the basement, below the layer zeros and the layer ones and the layer twos. And look at what's happened. It's been massive, which is enabling all of this wonderful technology to emerge. So I think of our social graphs, our data, our relationships as the modern day version of a telephone number. And if we have data portability in the new internet and interoperability in the new internet, then we have something that is incredibly powerful. So I don't think we've ever seen the network effect of a networked social networking ecosystem.
And we're going to come back to that in 1 second. I was just, because you hit on this transition in mobile telephony and the policy pathways we took to get there. And I imagine that regulators and policymakers were slightly more sympathetic to this idea of portability of your telephone number because they had a telephone. And yet in our industry, at least in the United States and perhaps in other parts of the world, regulators and policymakers are actually barred from having digital assets. They're barred from participating in the very industry they're empowered to regulate. And so as a result, I suspect they're regulating from a position of fear. And if you took the word cloud over the mind of the crypto proponent and the crypto opponent, you're going to get completely polar opposite words. How do you see that? And candidly, can we leverage your public policy school in Washington to give folks some more hands-on experiences and start to destigmatize the word crypto and blockchain?
Well, I think the school can be helpful, but this is going to take an army. As Jeremy also said, this is going to take us all. And, when we've built the tech, we've launched a layer one chain called Frequency, which sits above Polkadot. We did a diagnostic on 30 different blockchains. It was the one most ready for social networking. And so Frequency is a tooling layer. So now people can build apps on it. The first app with 20 million users, an existing 2.0 social media app by the name of MeWe, is migrating over as we speak. And the first migration will occur next month. So this has been going on for 4 years. What we realized, though, Dante, and by the way, it's a key decision we made in building the technology, was that we need this opt-in ownership, individuals controlling their own data, internet. And to do that, we need a new protocol in the internet, a non-tokenized protocol. When I say it, so that no one can ever control it. Think of it as like we think of HTTP. So we call it DSNP, a decentralized social networking protocol, which is what enables what I'm talking about, which is this individual agency, by imagining and creating an internet where the data, all of our data, which is accumulating as we sit here, just huge amounts, is embedded in the internet itself. It's not data that sits in private entities. We have ownership and control of our data within that universal social graph, decentralized universal social graph. And in the future, rather than us clicking on these absurd cookies, giving up our life to these platforms, imagine a new set of apps that are built that are clicking on our terms for the use of our data, for what purpose, on what terms, for how long, etc., with the ability to rescind that permission. So we control the data, and that will change everything. Self-sovereign identity is critical. Right now, the internet is the reason why it's so much bad behavior is bad actors they're not only anonymous, they're invisible because it was not designed correctly. And it needs to be, and it can be fixed. So the tech is happening. My concern and our concern is that we're in no better position to decide what's good for society than anybody else designing technology, which is why we started something called Project Liberty. We realized that we need a totally different way of thinking about this, and we need to fix the tech to save democracy and the mental health of young kids and so on and so forth. However, fixing tech alone is not going to solve all of humanity's problems. So we need others involved. So Project Liberty has 4 tracks: a tech track, yes, also a governance track. I see some folks here from, we have started an institute, which is the flagship of that governance track here in Paris and in DC, and we'll be opening on the west coast of the US very soon. And a policy track, which is engaging the policymaking community, and a movement track, which is, I think, the most important, which is how do you get civil society educated, involved, and excited about what's on the horizon? Because we're in a very difficult moment, but there is a real light at the end of the tunnel here if we can work together to get there. And it is difficult with the public, the elected officials and the public sector right now, because there's not a lot of fluency here. And I think we need to do a better job of educating as well. But we found in that example I gave you around telecom, when we built it and showed them what the friction was, they were more able to understand what needed to be fixed. And I think as we're building, we can demonstrate in a clearer way. Remember this, and again, I'm talking social networking. We need to have apps that we're not talking about blockchain and crypto and code and this and that. They're just easy to use applications that are polished and intuitive and so on and so forth, as good or better than any that exist now. In the world of 2.0, nobody's focused on HTTP or the lower internet protocols, and we need to just change it and put something out that people say this is very good, and I'm incentivized to use this. Remember, this new web, unlike Web 2, which is an internet of data, is an internet of data and value. Fundamental difference and very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on one of my favorite themes, which is, you're changing the world with the technology when the technology fades to the background. And the fact that we're still now 15 years since the Bitcoin white paper talking about hardware and software and the things that make it happen as opposed to the outcomes or the missing pieces that the market desires is compelling. And I think that's very real for Circle. The question I had as well is, are the banks in our world like the incumbent social media companies in yours? So if you're thinking about building a more empowering social network where, to define Web3, you could read, write, and own content, whereas in the first 2 versions, it was one-sided perhaps, and all the value went to one postal code in California. Do you see something analogous there between the way the big banks protest and the traditional financial services protest the advent of these technologies and financial services to the way established social media platforms are sort of protesting some of your work? And you're funding work with Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, among many others in this area. Yeah.
ProjectLiberty.io, by the way, is the site you can go to and look at these 4 tracks and who's jumping on board and so forth. I'm really delighted. I don't know if Martina is here, but Martina Larkin is the new CEO, and she was 15 or so years at the World Economic Forum, running a large part of that platform. So we're starting to really accelerate. Yeah, I see similarities because both are about disintermediation, right? Removing a middleman of some kind, right? That is really no longer necessary in a lot of these transactions. I think the issues around and I think the issues that will be confronted are very real, right? Because there are large incumbents who don't want to see the change. That's for sure. You'd be better able than I to comment on the resistance or the friction, broadly speaking, with digital currencies. I can imagine, that is critically important to sovereigns, right? Because that's a part of how they really control the economy and so forth, is by their monetary policy and so forth. So central banks, commercial banks, they're going to proceed with real caution. Similar issue on the side of big tech is certainly not going to be excited about this, but that's why I say the movement track of all this is the most important, because I think we're all beginning to understand how disrupting and destructive, actually, the internet is as currently designed. And we've been sitting here, I don't know, talking how long, we haven't even talked about generative AI. And this is, if we think social media is making a mess of things now, including bank runs, by the way.
Yes. We've just had a Twitter-fueled bank run on Silicon Valley Bank.
So this is we read more and more about disinformation and misinformation and how it's, destabilizing our political systems. And by the way, I just don't understand how you have a democracy, never mind a thriving democracy, with autocratic technology. I understand how you have a thriving autocracy with autocratic technology, but democracy, show me how over time, when there's that much power and that much information in the hands of a few unelected people. Look at now this epidemic that we're seeing, and the research is now available around children's mental health. This is really rewiring the brains of a whole generation of young people. It's very, very scary. And so we, I think, need to move very, very quickly because what's coming at us with generative AI is going to make what's happened with social media look like tip of the iceberg stuff. It's kid stuff by comparison. And where does that information that generative AI where are they drawing from? Of course, that it's reading every book ever published in human history and doing, but its active information is scraping social media. And so it's really misinformation and disinformation on steroids. It's really an incredibly powerful technology. And what happened, AI is not new. Just if you take the last decade and look at how the technology has all emerged, and Jeremy spoke about that in terms of the speed at which things are happening. And on the one hand, that's fantastic. On the other hand, we need to create some ground rules. We need sort of societal governance. How do we use this technology for people, for human beings, for us, in a positive, useful way? Imagine a world where this powerful technology was actually supporting democracy, making kids healthier, protecting them, as opposed to the things it's doing now. And this AI has emerged not because there was some major discovery in the last 6 months. It's because there was a user interface. And now everybody has access to, a massive tool and can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah. So we had a president who said there was no word in French for entrepreneur. And yet here we are at Paris Blockchain Week. And I think so many of the values of this wonderful country, égalité, fraternité, liberté, are candidly, I think, the very values of this industry, this technology, and the things that we see that are flawed. And with the minutes we have left, Frank, you have done the very thing I think Circle would like to do as well, and establish real deep transatlantic ties, transatlantic business. You've done this with Sciences Po and Project Liberty. You are the owner of Olympique de Marseille, the football team. And so as you see that opportunity for society, industry to be aligned and to genuinely have parity in sort of economic, social, and industry interests, that they're not trade-offs, why France?
Well, we have some really deep relationships here. Having said that, France for us is in Paris in particular, a proxy for Europe, just as DC is a proxy for, and the relationship with Georgetown is a proxy for the US. This needs to go beyond, our effort is going beyond and needs to DC and Paris, right? I was just in Brussels recently and, speaking to Thierry Breton about the situation. And it's a very interesting, actually, I'll tell the story because it illustrates, I think, a point around building something, an alternative. He was quite pleased with, the recent legislation, not so recent now, DMA, DSA, and so forth, on top of GDPR, and how now there was, these clear public policy objectives in Europe around the use of technology and people's data in particular. And I said to Thierry, what if they don't, just these platforms don't obey it? He said, I've got the power now to shut them down. And I said, really? You're going to cut off people's access to the internet in 2023? You'll have more than trash on the streets. You can't, we need an alternative that actually supports the public policy objectives. We need the tech to support the public policy objectives. We're sitting around acting like things need to work the way they work. And our job and government's job is to mitigate all the damage, spend all of our resources on mitigating damage, solving problems, picking up pieces. The internet doesn't have to work the way it works. It works because we've all agreed, either implicitly or explicitly, to a few protocols. So we adopt another protocol, have it work differently, give us back control of our data. I think the entire discussion about in focusing on these platforms and, they shouldn't use the data for this, they can use it for that, it needs to be controlled here, what about this? It's the wrong conversation. The conversation should be about why do they have our data in the first place? It's ours, like our phone number. It's simple, right? Return it to individuals, let them make good or bad decisions with it. But that is so fundamental to a democratic society. Not to mention, in this new world, there's value there. And we're all creators, right? We all have, if we have access to a huge platform that can open doors for people that are currently shut out of a system. Worse yet, their data is being scraped and exploited, sold, used in permissionless ways, and even weaponized. I think it's a much better world on the horizon, but we don't have a lot of time.
We're going to build that world with Frank. Thank you, Frank McCourt. Thank you.
You're welcome, Dante. Thank you.